Greetings, Guardians. My name is Byfear. You know the drill. Spoiler alert up here at the front. No spoiler thumbnail for the first week or so. EDZ gameplay while we give the no spoiler bit. If you want to play Renegades before listening to this, or what are you doing here? Just go play it. Sure, there'll be no spoilers for the next few minutes, but like, yeah, find out for yourself if you want to go play Renegades and not be spoiled. For the quick no spoiler version, 24 hours in, these are my impressions. I think it'd be fair to say that Renegades is worth playing for sure. The campaign has a ton of really strong moments to it and sets up some stuff for the future of the Fate Saga and the franchise generally. It moves the Fate Saga forward very tangibly by the end of the campaign experience as well. Villains are good. I think the crew we've got assembled for the heroes is mostly excellent. The cutscene work is up there with some of the best that Destiny's had in general terms. That being said, there are some rough edges to the experience that hold it back from perfection or just being excellent. It was a 6 to 8 hour campaign experience depending on what difficulty you played on and how quickly you went through, but honestly, I wished it took a little bit longer. I don't necessarily know if that works with the pacing of the campaign, but I wanted more time with the villains and the heroes and just the story generally, and I guess that's a testament to how much I enjoyed it. If you aren't a fan of Star Wars in Destiny, this obviously wasn't ever going to be for you, and if you're still yucking your yum about that over this expansion, that's fine, you're allowed to do that, but also, I mean, it's kind of beating a dead horse at this moment. Like, we all did this 6 months ago, and there's some stuff that some of us are still not happy about on that front, but like, hey, you know, you do you, that's fine. The campaign is not as complex as Edge of Fate in terms of its narrative and the concepts it goes into and the deep lore that it explores, but I think it's a lot more refined as a trade-off, and I think, for what it's worth, whilst I really enjoyed Edge of Fate and I think it's very nuanced, I think that more people will enjoy Renegades, and I don't think it necessarily sacrifices too much in the department of nuance for that. Granted, that's also partly because I think the gameplay experience is going to be much more palatable to a bunch of people than it is versus what Edge of Fate had to offer with Ball. And I will continue to remind you, there is no Ball. Not in Renegades, at least. If I had to score the campaign, and if I was going to say that Final Shape is up there at my highest 10 out of 10, I would say that this is sitting somewhere around an 8. There's definitely a lot of room for improvement in tangible ways, but the stuff that is there is actually really enjoyable. If you were hoping that this is a good experience, go for it. I should also note, of course, this was never going to be a Forsaken-sized expansion, and I think we all knew that going in, given that it's $40. But also, that doesn't necessarily mean that the story wasn't going to be good, and for what it's worth, I do think it's actually pretty good. As I said in my thoughts from way back when, it's still 24 hours in, and it's too early to see if there's longevity to all of the activities that are going on currently in Renegades, but we'll find that out as time goes on. Anyway, we're going to get into spoilers now. You have been warned. If you've not played Renegades and want to finish it for yourself, turn away. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Welcome to some point in the Renegades campaign. Martin, throne whatever you want, I don't know. Alright, so before we jump into this properly, I want to preface this by saying I'm going to start with the bad and then get to the good later, because there are a lot of nitpicks I have with the campaign, but some of them are much more important than others. The campaign overall is good, but I wanted to touch on a few things here because they don't sit right with me, and I do think that this is actually really useful critique, and it's not like there's anything sweepingly catastrophic here. There's no MacGuffin hunt for the Veil without knowing what the Veil is. So, starting off with the top, the campaign and its characters are mostly pretty good. However, there are a few things that I wanted to call out, and starting off with, I think Arnor's reaction to us is a weird one. She's generally a pretty good character, and I think that most people will like her, but the problem I think is when sometimes she acknowledges our power, the things we've done, for example, being anointed by the Traveler to wield transcendence of both light and darkness, you know, all of that stuff, that's good. But it's then contrasted with her immediately calling us a rookie the moment that entering the Praxic Order and getting a blade is concerned. And that's just... nah, that's a bit weird. If it was once made in sarcasm, I'd totally get that, and if it was just a shoulder rub for something, yeah, totally fine, understandable. A bit of a laugh-it-off fuzzball kind of moment. But she keeps doing it, and at this point I think it's just worth reminding Arnor that we've killed the Witness, and Oryx, and Crota, and Nezarec, and Rolk, and Callus, and, like, everyone. There are more gods that we've killed than she has killed Guardians, and that's quite an impressive resume for her in the first place. So, like, no, it's a bit of weird character dissonance there. Not everyone needs to be kissing our character's feet when they walk through, and by God, I think that would be awful, but the more important point here is that Arnor is a pragmatist. When she's at her best, it's when she's immediately trusting that she can put us in a dangerous situation and deploy us into the frontier, and just get the job done. Then she comes along and calls us a rookie, and it's kind of this moment of... what? It's not massive, but I think it's one of those things where they need to lean into the Ludo narrative more of us being completely competent. At no point should someone sit there and look at our Guardian and think, wow, what a tough challenge they have. Not one walker, but two walkers. Man, I hope they'll be able to go ahead and get that. Nah, in the first mission, Arnor is great because she has that moment of being like, hey, the pilots are ejecting safely. Rectify that mistake. That's good. Arnor sitting there and then calling us untested and a rookie when we're going into the Praxic Temple, that's people treating us with kid gloves, and we are so beyond that. We've killed the witness. I think it's a fair assumption for the narrative team, because of everything our Guardians have done, and because we're well beyond tutorials at this point, that characters should always be treating us as players as though we're competent actors in the story. The Drifter calling us a young'un and not knowing anything about the Dark Ages, that's completely fine. Within character, within context, like, that's great. But when it's actually something of, you didn't do anything in the Dark Ages, and therefore you couldn't possibly do this thing where you kill another Guardian, no, absolutely not. Again, not a major thing, but yeah, I think that's worth calling out and just pointing out because it's the only time it happens, and it's the one time when Arnor's character didn't land with me. Next up, there's a thing about dialogue in orbit. Sometimes it will play a line of dialogue, and it's really awesome because it's conversations between characters expressing different things. It's really, really cool. Except for when it gets cut off. There are so many times where we'd go to orbit between missions, just hoping that we would catch a little bit of dialogue. And then nothing happened. And then, every other time when we just went straight into a Lawless Frontier mission, it would load us into orbit, dialogue would start playing, and then it would fade to silence as we actually loaded into the mission itself. And that was killing me. I missed almost every single one of these moments, and it sucks. I was about to hear Lodi ask 45 questions about worm gods, and that didn't happen. Like, seriously, I really missed that dialogue. Some of it sounded like it was going to be amazing. There's one line I heard at the preview event that I completely missed this time around. I look forward to playing through the campaign a second time to hear it all, but we've got to find a better way of deploying this stuff. Previously, this showed up in Heresy and Revenant, and it was one of those moments where it made sense because these would deploy at the end of the character quests that you would get, and it would be a week where you'd be able to sit with that dialogue. You know, you had plenty of time to hear it, process it, do whatever with it. Now it's an hour-by-hour story. That doesn't work. Maybe it needs to be more of a ghost phone moment, and I'm not advocating that we go back to the kind of radio console thing that we had before, but this is something where I'm missing that dialogue. And I'm sure some people don't care about it, but some of this stuff is really cool. Like, there's one bit where Eris tries to invoke the 9 35 times by rite and tithing through the hive methods, and it doesn't work, and you can hear her frustration. It's great, but I want to hear all of that. Next up, there's a little bit of lore weirdness. When we first go to Venus, there's a note about how, wow, we've not been here for a while. And then there's a note about how Venus disappeared, which, I don't know if that's a thing or not. It's entirely possible this is what happened and it's just not been mentioned in the background, but yeah, I didn't realize Venus was absent. When I played through this on the first time with my buds, I questioned whether they'd mixed up Venus for Mercury. But yeah, it's just weird because it's never been mentioned up until this point. Maybe not a huge deal, but I'd love to hear more about it, I suppose. Next up on one of the bigger things, I feel like the ending is a little bit unresolved with no major villain deaths, but I don't know if it's necessarily the right decision to have killed anyone here. Premier Loom and Dredgen Bale, they both feel like they have so much left to give in their story, and I feel like killing one of them off in the campaign would have made them villains of the week, and that's not what we want right now. We want strong, well-developed characters. We had that big explosion, but I really don't feel like there was a completely resolved storyline here. And maybe that's not terrible, given that this is the second entry in a larger saga, but honestly, I did kind of hope that there would be a little bit more. This generally feeds into my feeling that the campaign could have been another 2 hours with some more curated missions and some other exploration of the story, and it would have been great for it, but equally, the story they tell feels like a tight cinematic release version of it, and I don't know if more stuff in there would have necessarily done better. On the note of post-campaign stuff, I really don't know how I feel about Arnor and Eido choosing to tell people within the city about the prophecy at the end. That's one of those moments where it makes sense. I mean, Arnor is even questioning Zavala about the requirement for secrecy, even in the earliest stages of the campaign, and Eido was certainly never happy about it, but yeah, I don't know, it seems as though it's one of those moments of, this is a really massive thing that's happened in Destiny, and I'm sure there are riots in the city right now, but yeah, we just don't get to see that. Then of course there's the question of how much Star Wars is too much Star Wars, and whether it was feeling like it was Star Wars crammed into Destiny. Having played it all, there are definitely moments where it seems very clearly identifiable as some bits where, oh yeah, that's a very, very obvious Star Wars throwback. The shield generator on Venus, for example. Yeah, big Episode 6 vibes. As I discussed before in my video about my thoughts and first impressions from the preview event, it's mainly about the aesthetics and the sound design of Star Wars. That's mainly what's been transposed in 1 for 1. However, if you enjoyed an actual Destiny story, you have one. So that balance is there, but whether it's a right balance for you is another question. If you were going to be in that place of just kind of like hunting down all the Star Wars references and then pointing out each one and then being like, oh, there's another one. I mean, yeah, there's plenty of those moments, but it's also something where this was a Star Wars expansion. I hate to say it, but there were always going to be moments like that. This is something else that's a bit more coded to me, but yeah, I think that there's a little bit less lore in this than I would have liked. There are great, strong character moments within the campaign and story, but there's one lore book. And that's kind of disappointing, to be honest. Now, there are still the assembly of lore tabs and whatnot, and we did get quite a few lore books in Edge of Fate, so I'm sure there is a trade-off to be made there. But it's also one of those things where there's a bigger discussion to be had about that in the future. I've put that off for quite a while, but to be frank, I think it's also something where the narrative team is probably down to smaller sizes. There's probably only a certain amount they can actually get done year by year for Destiny, and this is kind of where things are sitting right now. Oh, and last, this is not a narrative thing, but the legendary difficulty has become way too easy. We need to get back to the days of Witch Queen, and we need to drill down to that tightly balanced, tough but fair encounter design that made that so good. In a 3-man stack, I was just rolling through things with Perez and Ares, and it was just way, way too easy. Now, that is quite a few nitpicks, but with all that being said, I don't think there's anything in there that is absolutely catastrophic. Some of it is even relatively small stuff that isn't necessarily going to yuck everyone's yum. I may have been the only person who noticed some of it. I also don't think this makes Renegades a bad expansion overall, because, yeah, so much of the campaign is really damn good. So let's talk about that. First of all, cutscene work in this expansion. It is exceptionally good. I think that way back at Heresy, Bungie started to hit its stride. Now, I think they're really starting to push some boundaries. The Lodi and Eris cutscene in particular I think is my favorite, but there's a close second in the Nightfall/Eclipse energy attack on Tharsis. Showing Bale's villainy and his philosophy in that is actually also really good there too. The cutscenes throughout this are just fantastic, and I really am so glad we got to see all of this. I think it's also important to note that not all of the good moments of this campaign are bound up in the missions and the cutscenes. I think one of the strongest moments of Act 1 is actually just after the Tharsis attack. There's the choice the narrative team made to give you a mission objective to dig through the wreckage of Tharsis and look for survivors, only for you to find none. That's a really ballsy choice, and I loved it. It sells the devastation and the gravity of the attack by the Nightfall energy, and it's really, really good. Combine this with the follow-up where Ido basically just tells us about how she's feeling, and yeah, this is really, really effective. Speaking of which, the dialogue and character moments in Renegades level with Edge of Fate and continue the trend that has been in Destiny since Final Shape of really powerful back and forth moments between characters. The writing is really strong and the delivery by all the voice actors is excellent too. I think there is an exception in there with Premier Loom being just a little bit too slow between all the different sentences that he says, but he's the only exception. This is made even clearer by the fact that Dredgen Bale is such a strong villain, and oh my god, Dredgen Bale! From the outset in that first campaign mission, it was very clear that he was a fallible character, and there was a possibility that Bungie just leaned into that for just one mission and then just kind of ignored it for the rest of it and let him do his villainy. He feels like a character who is genuinely trying his best at all times, and is human, actually fallible, making mistakes. In more ways than one, in fact. That twist where they show that he is just a dude, as opposed to a guardian, as opposed to a light bearer. Oh my god, it's a brilliant reveal. It recontextualizes everything about his character and everything he's done up until that point. Also, that man has balls of steel. Like, he's playing on no lives remaining, no revives available mode all the time and chose to fight Arnor Mahal, a light bearer with a frickin' Praxic blade. And he goes balls to the walls. Unironically, he might be the bravest character in Destiny simply for that fact alone. And the reveal of it being done with a thorn that breaks off his hand as well, that's brilliant too. I adore everything that's been done there. Everything even down to the Drifter saying, "Where's your ghost, kid? Where's your ghost?" And then the reveal afterwards that he is just the son of one of the owners of the foundries in the city. 10 out of 10. It also completely contextualizes why approval is so important to him, and it completely levels with the inspirations that Allison talked about in our interview for his character. I think Bayle is also a really interesting narrative device for other characters as well, because Bayle isn't just giving us the story about Bayle. Bayle is also telling us indirectly, and yet also very directly, a story about Six. Every time Six manipulates Bayle, it's a great window into Six's cruelty, into Six's way of viewing the world. And it's a really great way of starting to know more of the Nine. There was every danger when this started that Bayle could have just been your menacing Dredgen who said all of about 10 lines, tried to look menacing, and then just sort of sauntered off stage later. Every line is deployed economically, and every time he speaks it's a treat. There is almost no point at which a line is wasted, and at that, I think every single time we do hear something out of Bayle, it moves the plot forward in some direction, either functionally or tangibly with emotion. Suffice to say, without Dredge and Bayle, this expansion just doesn't work. Next up, I think we should talk about Fire and Ice. It is, after all, the mission where you get your Praxic Blade, and it had to kind of be a banger of an exotic mission. Putting an exotic mission in the middle of the campaign is also a ballsy move, and you know what? I kind of like it within this context. I've heard some people talk about how they think it's one of the better exotic missions that Bungie's ever released. It's filled with more secrets still, and we have more to discover, clearly. The design of the mission in so many aspects is really awesome, but in particular, I love how it weaves in with Star Wars. And I know that sounds a bit weird, but let me contextualize. The European Praxic Vault and Temple? Yeah, sure, that's definitely something where we can sit there and be like, okay, there's your Destiny context to it. But it's also a really subtle nod, I think, to Ilum. Ilum is the place in Star Wars where everyone gets their Kyber crystals for their lightsabers, and so it's kind of this perfect location for a Praxic Blade mission, where you pick up one for yourself. Furthermore, it's just worth remembering then that Europa and Ilum are both icy planets, and all of this takes place in dark, foreboding caves. So yeah, it's like a one-to-one, it's really cool. Even down to some of the terrible, awful, ruined energy around this kind of temple, it's just good stuff. It also has to be said, I really need to touch on this. Keith David's return as Zavala was a really nice touch, not just because his character is continually involved in the story, but also because I think for this, his involvement does make sense. Even now though, I think it's really nice because I think they're continuing to touch on and pay respect to Lance Reddick's old work. Zavala talks early on within the campaign about how the earlier campaigns on Mars, as in, you know, Cerberus, Vi-3, whether we wanted it or not, we were in a war with the Cabal on Mars, about how, yeah, that was Zavala's favorite times with us. It's a really special nod to our dearly departed commander's legacy, but also Keith David still continues to deliver like an absolute champion. I stand by what I said way back when, where I stated that Keith David is indeed probably the only person who could have replaced Lance Reddick, and yet it is still impossible to replace him. That being said, there's nothing but respect here. I really love that this was done. It's continually respectful of Lance and his legacy. Whilst old characters are present, and whilst we do get a bunch of stuff with new villains, there is one other new allied character that I absolutely have to pick out, and that's Blue. Oh my god, Blue! It is wild to see a strong new villain in a story in any context, but Blue? Blue is going to be a bunch of people's new favorite character in Destiny. Her opening moments where she chews out the Drifter, oh my god, it's so good! She is just perfect as his ghost. She's a spiteful, mean-spirited little con artist just like him, and it's perfect. If we look at the spectrum of ghosts in Destiny, and we see Imaru as this lawful evil character, I think Blue is somewhere in the region of chaotic neutral, and she is amazing. God, I love this character so much. It should also be noted that as well as new characters being introduced, or well, old characters finally getting voices, I think there's also some tangible stuff that happened on the larger scale that's worth mentioning. For example, the post-campaign mission and Lodi's revelation actually pushes a lot of the Fate Saga forward. I think this really works because this is Lodi coming to the revelation for himself and showing his competence. And it's not just out of thin air, this is from observations that he naturally makes with Bayle. and in the process he tells us what binding the Nine really means. That's tangibly moved things forward and also has a really interesting hint to the idea that we might be going to old Chicago in Shattered Cycle. But critically, it also tells us that binding the Nine involves putting them in mortal bodies, in vessels. And if we do that, I mean, that's good, because that leads to a direction where finally we can bind the Nine to characters that we actually know, or alternatively to new characters that we haven't met yet. It also potentially contextualizes what Dredgen Bale is going to be for in the future. It's not guaranteed, but I think that Dredgen Bale is going to be the quote-unquote vessel for 6. If all this is going to continue to go down this way, that also inevitably means that we've got some interesting questions about certain characters in Destiny's future. For example, what if we do need to find a vessel for the remnants of 3 in some manner? Maybe Lodi is channeling a little bit of 3 in this moment anyway. You ask questions about people who are particularly connected to certain planets, and you ask yourself, is Osiris maybe going to be the vessel for 1? Who's going to be the vessel for 9, the entire sun itself? What about Venus and all the characters connected to that? Mars certainly has a bunch of characters that are connected to it. Maybe one of the Bray sisters? Maybe Elsie? Maybe Zavala, given all his campaigns. And then there's the other outer orbits. Maybe it makes sense to pair Jupiter with someone like Elsie Bray there. And what about Uranus? Nobody has been to anywhere in an orbital body near Uranus, and so no one is really associated. And well, maybe with Neomuna and 8, we get another chance to take another stab at someone like Nimbus and see what they might be able to offer for the story. It's actually a video I want to do, is just this fun little guessing game of who might be the vessels of the Nine and who might speak for them. Because honestly, yeah, I think that this is actually a moment where we can start to see the rest of the Fate Saga pan out. Moving from the grander scale to the smaller scale though, there is one other little bit I wanted to point out before rounding things out though, which is just that there's a lot of small textured detail to the world, particularly around Tharsis Junction. I feel like it's a layer that needs to be called out and appreciated. You can find a Vex frame somewhere out there that says they're your #1 biggest fan. You have that moment when if you're not allowed to enter the Pikers area, they'll just have some Pikers that suddenly decloak and stop you from going any further. Hell, if you look deep enough into it, near the beginning of the campaign, you can find some extra dialogue in a text box with a character that is all about them being another Dredgen. And it's entirely possible that most of you just missed this. I'll see about getting videos out on this, but honestly, there's just a lot of cool depth and texture to this particular part of the world, and I think that that's worth appreciating all on its own. Oh yeah, and also the Ghost Community Theatre and all the random assembled Guardians. I can't remember if it's the cinematics team or the narrative team or somewhere in between that had all these Guardians put in there, but the Guardians that die in the Tharsis attack are the developers' Guardians, so it's really cool to see them implemented into the story as well. If only as side characters and if only to give a little set dressing to the world, but yeah, that's neat. Also, yeah, wow, I can't believe they killed everyone in the Ghost Community Theatre. Theatres really are cursed in a human culture kind of context, aren't they? Anyway, to summarize, for a smaller $40 expansion, I think this is sort of within the bounds of what's to be expected. You see, at this point, I think we all know that Destiny's not going to get these massive, sprawling expansions for some time soon. They need to build back and actually get to that point now. I think it's also worth acknowledging that they're probably doing all of this with significantly smaller teams than they used to. It certainly isn't cracking my favorites like Edge of Fate, which I thought was nuanced and has a lot of interesting stuff to do with its story, but I also have to acknowledge that Edge of Fate was something that, gameplay aside, narratively people did bounce off of because I think it was just a bit too complex. And that's fine. To be really clear, I think that having a refined and really juiced story is generally the better call, and for what it's worth, that's exactly what Renegades is. I can't shake that feeling that I wanted more out of Renegades, but not in the sense of I wanted more missions. I think in the sense of I wanted more time with these characters. My hope is that as the Fate Saga develops, we'll get more of this. Let's put it this way, if Dredgen Bale and Premier Loom continue to be present in Shadow and Order, and there's more story to do with them, I will be very pleased. It'll be a good time. Anyway, as I said before, I think if I had to score Edge of Fate, it's somewhere in an 8 out of 10. It doesn't crack the highs of something like Witch Queen, but I'd say that it is comparable to something that we've seen before that you would say is pretty good. It's better than the vast majority of Destiny expansions over the vast arc of Destiny's history, but that's not saying much. For the actual punch of the narrative itself, I slot this in somewhere at the rank of Taken King and Forsaken, but it's not up there with Witch Queen, Final Shape, or Edge of Fate for me. That being said, that doesn't make it bad at all. That makes it pretty damn good. And, you know, I'm excited to see where things go from here, because, yeah, this is legitimately a part 2 to the Fate Saga, and I'm excited to see where things go from here. Anyway, that's my 24 hours in first impressions, and hopefully that tells you what you need to know about the campaign. Anyway, I'm going to get to work on lore content. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, go ahead, do all the things. Hit the buttons, hit the hype, hit the like, sub if you want more content from universes near and far, and leave your own thoughts down below in the comments section. But as per usual, know that your viewership as always has been quite enough for me. And that in the meantime, my name is Bife. For Audacia ad Astra. I'll see you Starside.